tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. So a couple pieces to start us off with. One is a reflection coming from our recent few weeks of thinking about the Buddha's insight into rebirth and the nature of the self. We've talked a bit about the characteristic of not self, how it is interwoven with the characteristic of impermanence. And, I've been thinking about this and thinking, really just continuing to think about how to hold what seem like metaphysical teachings in this tradition, particularly the story about how rebirth works and who we are in relation to that, who we are in relation to others. This kind of extended relationality. Everyone has once been your mother, your partner, your beloved, your child. These, the definition of a metaphysical idea is one that can't be verified. It's a story about the cosmos or our place in it that in some way we have to either take on faith or take as a metaphor or take as a seed for practice. But metaphysical ideas, unprovable narratives about the universe, can't by themselves be liberating. In other words, somebody else's story about how things are cannot by itself liberate anyone other than the person who came up with it. For us to find liberation, like a kind of freedom, we have to have something like a direct experience ourselves. And so the record that we have in the early texts is that the Buddha is this guy who had a direct experience, a really extraordinary, pretty rare, powerful direct experience. The descriptions of it are somewhat like experiences recorded by other sages and saintly types, but not exactly the same. And part of what I was reflecting on is how the experience that powerful sages have, the experiences that folks have are all pretty idiosyncratic. If you think about the big religions and the religious founders, the founders of the big traditions, they all undoubtedly had very, very profound experiences, enough to change their life, but also enough to give them the kind of energy and force and power and charisma and will and brilliance and wisdom to offer something into the world that would change the lives of millions of people for thousands of years. But these people are all different from each other. It seems like if we take the stories, somewhat at face value, that Jesus, for instance, was a healer. That seems to have been one of the things he did. He taught a variety of things. Most notably, he taught that it was a good thing to care for the poor, but his power, such as it was, and leaving aside the resurrection for a moment, because that's metaphysics, we could think about what that actually was when he was, executed and then seemed to appear again to his followers later on. So that could be parsed in a number of ways. But the power that was described, during his lifetime was that he healed people. He raised this guy from the dead, Lazarus, and he, healed this blind person. And that was one thing he could do. So he had that power. The Buddha didn't go around healing people. That wasn't his power. What the Buddha did was he saw things. And so I want to start off by reframing our sense of who the Buddha was in a kind of idiosyncratic way that I haven't heard talked about very much, but that's there in the texts, which is that the Buddha was a clairvoyant. And the thing that he did that was the character of his profound experience was that he saw something. And this seeing runs through the whole tradition, right? It's present in the name of the meditation that leads to insight, vipassana. Passana means seeing, and the V is an amplifier. So really seeing, deeply seeing, clear seeing, which we translate then as insight. The Buddha had an insight, and there's an equation that the tradition relies on that is virtually the same as an equation, by the way, that was taught by Socrates. So this is not unique to the Buddha, but the proposal is that seeing something clearly and directly yourself, so having a direct experience of perceiving, leads to a kind of knowledge, and that knowledge changes you. And so, you have metaphors or similes, like the simile of seeing a coiled shape on the path at night and being afraid until you get close enough to see that it's a piece of old rope and not a snake. And once you see that, and right, the seeing gives rise to the knowledge. Oh, I understand what that thing is. The fear dissipates. You can no longer be afraid of that rope, right? You don't have to work to let go of the fear. You might not even have to process the fear, although in a certain somatic way, you might have to like come down off of the sympathetic engagement of the moment. Ideally, in a trauma-healthy environment, you would be able to do that in the moment. Whew! Oh my God, sweetheart, I thought it was a snake. I was totally freaked out. It's not a snake. Like, okay, I hate snakes. All right, right? And all of that, the breathing, the whooshing, the making sound, the shaking it off, the jumping, that's trauma release, right? That's a somatic kind of reset. And then, 5 minutes later, you're supposed to be just happily cruising down the path with your person, your friend, and being like, oh my God, I got so freaked out there. That was crazy. Isn't it so beautiful out tonight? And it's gone. It's washed away. It's done, right? Because you saw it clearly. And the idea of this seeing clearly, of course, is that life is really repetitive. And so for whatever reason, the path that you hike on is littered with pieces of rope and odd bendy branches and all sorts of things, right? But as you mature in the practice, meaning you hike a lot, right? And you have your eyes open and you look and you observe, you start to see that that very few of the pieces of rope actually are snakes. And actually, every once in a while, you do see a snake and you learn how different ropes and snakes actually look. And then pretty soon, you actually can recognize quite quickly a rope versus a snake, right? For a while, my kid thought every spider was a black widow. He'd be like, Pop, 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 it's a black widow. And I would come in, and I would be like, no, it's a wolf spider. And they're actually friendly, leave it be. Like, they're good. Papa, papa, it's a black widow. And I'm like, no, that's one of those spiders that builds little nests. They're harmless, leave it be. And eventually it was like, what does a black widow look like actually? And we would look up pictures of black widows and draw the shiny black. And I'm like, they're shiny. They're not fuzzy. They're round like this. And, if you can happen to get under their belly, which, you can't always, but if you can, like, there's that shape, right? And when he sees it, then, once he sees it and learns to see clearly, he won't be afraid of the wolf spider or the nest building spider or the ground spider, and so the idea that the Buddha brings forward is that it's necessary to see something clearly. And if you see those things, you won't ever be afraid you won't be ever be afraid around that thing again. So the things you're seeing, right, are partly the characteristics. So impermanence, suffering, selflessness, or impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and selflessness. That's kind of the beginning level. You're seeing the workings of karma, or kamma in Pali, which means you're seeing that actions bear fruit. But there's a couple things that are hard to see. And this is why it's important that the Buddha has a superpower, or a highly developed faculty of seeing, that the Buddha is a clairvoyant. The Buddha does not, he doesn't ask us to accept these things on faith, but they are hard to see. And so after his enlightenment, he has this moment where he says, beings have dust in their eyes, and they won't be able to see what I have seen. Again, we're in the visual metaphor, right? You can't see, your eyes are clouded. All you can see is dust if you have dust in your eyes. You can't even really see well if you have dust in your eyes. What does the Buddha see? So remember the Buddha's story that, and again, it's partly historical, it's partly mythical, but there was a person, Siddhartha Gautama of the Sakyan clan. He did practice, as far as we can tell, with some meditative teachers of his day, two ascetic teachers, Uddaka Ramaputta and Alara Kalama. And these two teachers teach him how to access two different states of kind of disembodied, formless absorption. So one of them teaches him to rest in the state of nothingness, where you're in kind of like, if you took that hollow body meditation that we did in the beginning and you made that kind of absolute, that the whole world just says, the whole universe has nothing in it, that everything is nothing, that's a meditative state you can rest in. So the Buddha learns that first, and then he learns a state called neither perception nor non-perception, which is super subtle. It's a very subtle, again, disembodied, these are formless states. So the body dissolves into space, consciousness dissolves, even the sense of there being anything or nothing dissolves. And then you can't even really call it perception anymore, but it's a profound stasis. And the Buddha would teach these states forever, so they're not unuseful, but they're not the end of the path. And the mistake that his teachers, Alara Kalama and then Uddaka Ramaputta, made is that each of them had attained this state. It feels very profound to be in those states, and they interpreted those states as liberation. This is common in some of the other yogic traditions of his time, and it was common in some later Hindu yogic traditions, to interpret a meditative state as liberation. Right? I can touch a state where there's no self, utter peacefulness, utter tranquility, no disturbance. That must be samadhi, and samadhi must be liberation. And the Buddha tasted those, but he had the intuition. He realized that he could enter those states and then come out of them. And when he came out of them, he wasn't actually liberated. He only felt liberated while he was in them. And in a sense, they're a kind of trance. And he was like, oh, that's not it. Entering trance is not final liberation. It's really good training, though, because part of what you have to do is you have to get out of the like the surface level trance of distracting thought. So it's necessary to be able to settle the thinking and emoting process enough to really rest deeply and stabilize the attention. But those states were not the end. So then he went on to he sort of swung to the other side, and he was like, well, if being fully disembodied is not the way, what if I get so fully embodied that I like attack the body with painful sensation and don't check out? So then he did ascetic practice and starved himself to death, almost, and did super painful stuff for like 6 years and almost died. There's a beautiful Cambodian Dharma poem called Maya's Lament. It's a poetic version of the moment when the Buddha is almost dead. He's lying there on the floor of the forest under a tree, and he's, he just looks awful. And the spirit of his mother comes to him, Maya Devi. She died when he was 7 days old, so she's been watching over him from the heavens, and she comes, and this song is her lamenting, saying, "My son, my beautiful son, what has happened to you? What are you doing? And your beautiful body, and I can't bear to see you like this." And in the poem, he has the wisdom to say, he says, "Mother, it's okay. I've been like this for a while, but not much longer. I'm going to be okay," essentially. And it's beautiful, it's moving, and that whole tradition has kind of stunning poetic understanding of some of the drama in the Buddha's life, that they've really fleshed out the emotional side there. But he does that whole practice, and again, as he realizes that also is not the way, that the mind needs to actually be able to see clearly, and you can't see clearly either if you're stuck in a formless absorption or if you are subsumed in pain and torment. So he has a vision of himself as a child under the rose apple tree, as his father is doing a planting festival in the spring, and he's sitting apart from the madding crowd, and naturally settles into a pleasurable, relaxed absorption with the breath and the body, first jhana. So he has the intuition that that's the way. He has to nourish the body. Just at that moment, Sujata, the first lay devotee, comes bearing milk rice as an offering to the tree spirit where she prayed for a son 20 years before and was given a son. And she has been the Buddha's mother in 100 previous lifetimes. And as she brings the purified offering in a golden bowl to him, she starts lactating because she sees her son. He's not her son in this lifetime. But the Buddha has 2 visits from maternal figures, essentially, his own mother and Sujata, who nourishes him. He accepts the food. So he has this vision of himself as a child, and that leads to the turning in his path where he accepts nourishment. He makes contact again with the divine feminine in these 2 different forms, we can say, and then having regained his strength, mythically we could say maybe he eats for a while to build himself back up. But in the story, after drinking the milk rice, he takes this golden bowl that she gives to him, and he goes to the nearby river, the Naranjara River, and throws the bowl in the river and says, "If my aspiration is to bear fruit, may the bowl float upstream." And the story tells us that the bowl immediately rushed out to the center of the current and went against it straight upstream. The story continues to tell us, you might not have heard this part, except that I tell it every once in a while, but I never heard anybody else tell it other than Blessed Tataloka Bhikkhuni, who told this story to me first. The bowl floats upstream and then is sucked down by a whirlpool and lands in the court of a Naga king who lives under the river. So there's a great snake king, dragon king, who lives under the river. Welcome to Wood Dragon Year this year. The great dragon king under the river, and the bowl lands on a pile of golden bowls because every Buddha does the same thing. And And to the Naga king who lives a very long time, the span of time between the Buddhas, which has been a cosmic eon, is like a day. And the Naga king hears the golden bowl clinking down on the pile of 7 other golden bowls stacked there. And the Naga king says, well, another Buddha has arisen in the world. It seems like only yesterday. So, it's a bit of a side note, but I love that story. So the Buddha then, does his practice, enters jhana, quiets the mind, and in his night of awakening, he has a vision. He really has 2 visions, right? The first vision is the vision of his own previous births or homes. His own previous births, he says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 10, 100, 1,000, 100,000, cosmic eons expanding and contracting. I saw my previous births. I saw where I was born, what my social role was, how I lived, what my livelihood was, what I ate, how I died, and where I appeared next, where I was born next. So he has a vision of his own past births. And then in his second vision, he has a vision of how beings pass on and appear in accordance with their actions. And so these are both feats of powerful concentration-supported clairvoyance. That's his thing, right? He doesn't have a vision of himself becoming one with the cosmos. He doesn't have a vision of a deity that is he doesn't have a vision of Brahma or becoming Brahma, the deity. That would be like a Vedanta type vision. He has this very particular clairvoyant, I'm just going to keep saying the word because it's interesting to say in relation to the Buddha as his superpower. He has this particular clairvoyant insight into past births, and then how that's true for others as well, and how it works is ethical. With this as the seed, those are the 2 insights, and then the third insight or knowledge is the knowledge of the uprooting of the taints or the destruction of the defilements, the asavas. And so this is that equation that I mentioned is the same in Socrates, that there's seeing and knowledge. And this will get formalized for the Buddha in the phrase knowledge and vision of things as they really are. And that is the translation of a marvelous Pali word that you should memorize, Yata Bhuta Jnana Dasana, because it just rolls off the tongue. Yata Bhuta, things as they really are, Jnana Dasana. Jnana is knowledge, and Dasana is like knowledge and vision. So knowledge and vision of things as they really are. That's the thing we're going for. That's the thing that makes liberation. So there's the knowledge of the thing, or there's the vision, and then there's the knowledge that it has been seen. And once it's been seen, like the rope that isn't a snake, you can't unsee it. So the Buddha sees previous births, and he sees it in such a way that he will never again be deluded by the what seems to be happening, which is this birth is the only thing, and there's birth, it's bounded by birth and death, and that's all there is. His vision of past births shatters the idea he might have once had that this body is himself, because he can see that he's had so many other bodies before. And it shatters the idea that this body is permanent, because he's seen death happen over and over. But it also shatters the idea that death is permanent, because he sees that death is just followed by another rebirth. So any idea that he might have had that anything is permanent is broken by this vision. The second vision, that beings appear and disappear, appear and pass on in accordance with their actions, or pass on and reappear in accordance with their actions, is really him kind of processing that first vision and then turning his investigative eye outward. He says, okay, how does this work? Like, why did I go from this place to this place to this place? Why those exact births in that order? And is it true for others? So then he looks around the world and he sees people doing actions and then where they turn out, how their lives turn out, how their future lives turn out. And having seen those things, the third insight really is the fruit of having seen those. It's the knowledge that comes from having seen clearly those first two things. So once you see that rebirth is what you've been doing, and then number two, once you see that it's your actions that have compelled the next rebirths, and that birth is painful, that endless lifetimes, it's not what you want to participate in. That there's a different way of being that participates in existence without suffering. And the oddness of the vision here is that if you stop doing things to cause suffering, you don't just live on forever not suffering. In other words, you don't just have like an immortal happy life. Other religions came up with that idea. The Buddha's like, no, it doesn't work that way. Because if you stop doing things that cause suffering, you automatically stop doing things that cause rebirth. So we can reflect on that a little bit, but that's the equation. If you want to not suffer, you're going to not be reborn. That's it. Because you're reborn based in wanting, based in desire, based in unfinished business, based in craving. If you don't crave anything, why would you dive into another womb? Is the story, you know? Later on, right? People are going to take this by the horns and be like, because you wanted to help people. And that's going to become the bodhisattva ideal. Like, okay, I could leave anytime, but I'm not going to because people need teaching. And so that becomes the ideal of like, you know, Kuan Yin Bodhisattva is a Buddha. Like she could be not reborn anytime she wants, but she chooses to stay in this super long divine life of her bodhisattva nature right now in order to help people, in order to help the cosmos. So that's a choice you can make. You can really only make that choice once you get there. So like deciding to be a bodhisattva now while you're still immersed in suffering, I'm going to reveal myself as a Theravadan at heart and say I'm not sure how helpful that is. I can switch into Mahayana mind and be like, totally do that. But as far as I can tell, it might mean something different to do it at the edge of awakening versus mired in suffering. Get out of suffering. Whether you're on the bodhisattva path or the arahant path, you got to get out of suffering, right? And have some agency around rebirth. All right, that's a tangent. So this is what the Buddha does for his whole life. Is he teaches the path to get people to have these two basic clairvoyant insights, but he also, in the way that like Jesus was a healer, this is actually one of the only kind of supernatural or miraculous things that the Buddha regularly does. He apparently can do all of the others, the kind of flying, walking through walls, walking on water stuff. Like those are listed. He never does them. In the later mythical texts, there's a couple moments in the Pali Canon where he does the twin miracles of spouting fire and water from his body. But that's pretty rare. There's very few moments where he does that. There's one moment early in his career where he performs an extraordinary fire miracle, essentially to convert a bunch of fire worshippers, the first 500 fire worshippers that convert to his faith. He does it by having a fire conjuring battle with a demonic spirit inside a building, and they're all like, "Whoa, this dude really can do fire." But mostly he doesn't use supernatural powers in that way. But the thing that he does over and over is he tells where people are reborn. He uses his clairvoyance. And so regularly the monks and lay people will come to him and they'll say, such and such person or monastic just died. Where did they go? And he'll say, they had practiced well, but they were not fully complete. They were a non-returner. They went to this heaven realm, and they'll be complete from there. Or they are a stream enterer. They'll be born, 7 more times at most. They went here. Or this person went to hell. Like, they were really awful. They're going to hell for a while. Eventually, they'll get reborn somewhere else. So he does this over and over. That's his thing, is seeing where people went. And so I want to propose that we think of the Buddhist path in relation to this mysterious act of seeing that bears knowledge. Right? The title of Rob Burbea's beautiful book is called Seeing That Frees. There's the vision and there's the knowledge. So what we are trying to do then is not believe in anything, but cultivate the conditions for a moment or a few moments, but it only takes a couple, of such profound direct seeing that we will never again make a few fundamental mistakes again. And those fundamental mistakes are the mistakes of the characteristics, perceiving that which is impermanent as permanent, right? One interesting way we could translate impermanence is we could translate it as not immortal, right? If you want to really talk about like, what are the things we really think of as persisting? One of those things might be the personal soul, the soul of the person I love who passed, or my own soul that will have a career in heaven elsewhere. Not immortal. If we had one of those, we would be immortal, functionally immortal. We're not. We're not. The thing that is reborn is not a soul. There's momentum, but there's not an immortal self at the heart of the thing. Otherwise, liberation would be meaningless. There's nowhere to go. You would just be an immortal force hanging around forever, whether it's here or in a heaven realm. And if you're still existing like that, if you're still around with a kind of personal essence, there's going to be suffering, right? Like Lucifer, the angel, was tremendously beautiful and living at the right hand of the Father, right? Got jealous, wanted power, fell, right? That's suffering. That's suffering. They were angels, immortal angels living with God. I'm switching traditions here, right? Because that was suffering. I would call that dukkha. Lucifer had dukkha, right? And so impermanent, not immortal. It's a vision to realize that all of the things that we thought were ropes are actually, that we thought were snakes are actually ropes. All of the things that we thought were lasting and immortal are not. And it's a vision to think that the things we think of as satisfying, like good, even the good things, good friendship, erotic love, wealth, health, creativity, a delightful life in this body, in this life, like good things, right? Social justice, equity, people being cared for, like these are good things, but they don't solve the problem of satisfaction. They're not ultimately satisfying. They are temporarily, partially satisfying, and that ain't no small thing, especially for the oppressed and for pain. Like, pain is real. Please help those in pain. But don't be deluded to think that helping those in pain solves the problem of pain, right? Relieving pain and oppression doesn't solve the problem of pain and oppression. It delays it. But the comfort we gain is not immortal, is not permanent. So that's impermanence and suffering, and of course selflessness, is implied in all of this, right? There's nothing that could be called an immortal soul. And the traditions that really try to wrestle with this come up with metaphysical workarounds. Because, you know, people are smart, and religious people are intuitive and smart, and, you know, you come up with the idea of the immortal personal soul, and then you have to figure out, like, well, what does that mean? You know, how many souls are there? Do they all just crowd into heaven? At the end of time, is everyone automatically saved, or automatically damned, or just left out to dry? You know, like, it gets complicated to try to come up with a story that would make the immortal soul make sense. And that's why the immortal soul is unverifiable. It's a metaphysical idea. When there's an intuitive connection with the sense of permanence, in almost every tradition, the descriptions of that are more like the Vedanta description, that the individual soul is actually not separate from the one soul, which is Brahma, which is God, right? The individual is not actually an individual. The soul is actually just God in a human, you know, in an individual form. And the same exists in the Christian tradition. If you get to the centermost crystalline castle in Saint Teresa of Avila's 7 nested crystalline castles, you come through the divine marriage where the soul marries the Christ, and that's the end of that's the culmination of dualism in a sublimated erotic connection with the divine. And then beyond that, there's just union. There's actually the realization, which is, of course, the culmination of erotic love, as far as we experience it, perhaps in a moment of the dissolving of the dyad, right? The dissolving of the sense of the separation between the two beings who are in relationship into a kind of oneness. So nothing really holds of the idea of the separate self, the immortal separate self. And so our path then is to cultivate the enough of the clairvoyance of the Buddha to be able to have a direct experience of that, which is hard to see. It's hard to see. And that's, I think, why traditions that came later turned so much of the Buddha's vision into an object of faith. And that's one of the doorways, right? One of the doorways to understanding what the Buddha saw is to initially believe that the Buddha actually saw it. And so, you know, to be, I think, you know, to finish up here, like, this thing that we wrestle with so much around, you know, rebirth, or sort of some of the metaphysical ideas in Buddhism, I think at the heart of them we could say, are we having doubt about the Buddha himself? Are we actually having doubt about what the Buddha experienced? Right? We have this story, the Buddha saw past lives. I think there's a way of saying, you know, maybe that was an idiosyncratic vision that isn't universal, or maybe it's a metaphor that isn't literal. There's a lot of ways that our intellectual minds might try to make sense of these descriptions. And they all, many of them really have the result of suggesting that we don't really believe that what the Buddha saw was true for everybody. We might believe that he saw it for himself. Okay, wild clairvoyant saw his past lives, but I can't do that. And anyway, that's idiosyncratic. There's no way to prove that that's true for everyone. The proposition is that the seeing of the rope as a rope, that you know it's true for you, you also know it's true for your friend you're walking with. It's not a snake for that. Even if they can't see it clearly, you can be like, sweetheart, it's okay. I know it's a rope. I can see the rope. I'm telling you it's a rope. Look closer. This is the Dharma teacher giving you instructions. Look closer. It's a rope. Don't be afraid. Look closer. Slow down. Don't run. Look closer, and you'll see it. That's the meditation instructions. That's the instructions for seeing clearly. And so The proposal is that what the Buddha saw is true for everyone. And that's hard to bear, I think, for a skeptical postmodern mind. And so faith practices are hard for many of us. But the invitation is, fortunately, the invitation is that you're not meant to just believe it, because it can be trained. The Buddha doesn't say, I'm a magical saint and nobody else can do this. The Buddha says, this is a skill that can be trained. You can learn it. It's hard. Right? The Buddha's like, people have dust in their eyes. I'm not teaching this. Nobody will get it. And, Brahmasahampati comes down. He has another vision, right? Brahmasahampati comes down from the heavens and says, no, look around. There are beings with little dust in their eyes. The Buddha uses his clairvoyance again, looks around, little dust in their eyes, sees them, and says, all right, I'll teach for those people. And so you are them. Most people don't even care about this story. A lot of people, they're like, whatever. I have other things on my mind. You want to hear this story? I don't know. You keep coming back. I keep telling it. You keep coming back. That's the definition of having little dust in your eyes. And so you can learn this. And the training is to concentrate the mind through relaxation and steady absorption in stillness, in a pleasurable, childlike, non-expecting anything to be different, ease with what is, like you're sitting under a rose apple tree on a spring day and you have nothing else to do. And you get so quiet that you can remember your whole life and how you got here and what happened before that and how that's true for everybody. And that's what we're being asked to do. And the Buddha said, if it were not possible to free the heart from greed, hatred, and delusion through this practice, I would not suggest that you do it. But solely because it is possible to liberate the heart in this way, I suggest that you do it. So, on behalf of the ancient seer, the one who sees, I suggest that you do it, or carry on doing it, because you're doing it in beautiful ways. And it's a pleasure to walk the path with you and try to see clearly together.